We continue now at the top of Daf Kufta Zayin Amid Aleph and Meseches Zevachim. This is Zevachim Daf 116a. On the previous summit, the Gemara asked, how do we know that before the Mishkan was put up, that all animals could be offered as karbanos? And the Gemara brings the pasuk, Rav Huna brings the pasuk from Noach, where it says that Noach brought these animals, and the implication is Zecharim, Unekevos, male, female animals, Tamimin, Uvale Mumin, doesn't matter if they're Tamimin or Bale Mumin, whether they have a blemish or not. And we will read the parentheses. Diamar Mar, as the master said, Tamus v'zachrus bebehema, the general halacha is that by animals you have requirements of tamus, no blemish, or zachrus, that it has to be male. Ve'in tamus v'zachrus ba'ofos, these kinds of requirements don't apply by bird karbanos. There's no requirement that it not have a blemish, no requirement that it be a male bird. Ve'iskish behema la'of, tamimin uvale mumin. But in this case, again, based on the pasuk, we compare behema to of, and therefore we say tamimin and bale mumin again. That was all allowed before the Mishkan. La'afuke mechusar aver delo. Now that excludes, let's say it's missing a limb, that is not allowed. And the Gemara continues, Amar Belazar says, Minayin lemechusar aver, how do we know that if it's missing a limb, shenesar livnei Noach, that's forbidden for bnei Noach? Talmud lomer mikol hachai mikol basar amra Torah have behema. What the pasuk means over here is the Torah is saying, bring an animal shechayin roshe avarin shalah, that the tips of its limbs are alive, meaning again it cannot be mechusar aver. It's not allowed to be missing a limb. The Gemara says vidilma, but maybe lemuute treifa. Maybe it excludes a treifa. In other words, when the pasuk says mikol hachai mikol basar, it means an animal that's able to live, not a treifa that has a mortal wound that's going to die. And the Gemara says to that, ahumi lechayos zera nafka, that requirement of treifa would actually come from lechayos zera. The Gemara says, Hanichol amandamar treifa ene yoledis. Now, the reason why it would come from lechayos zera is because lechayos zera means that the purpose of bringing these animals on the teva is that those animals should be able to procreate. And so the idea is that a treifa is not able to procreate, and lechayos zera can be a source, therefore, according to the mandamar, that treifa ene yoledis, that a treifa can't give birth. So then it's learned out from that pasuk, lechayos zera, that a treifa is excluded. Ela lamandamar treifa yoledis, but according to the one who says that a treifa is able to give birth, ma'ikol amemar, what are we going to say? And the Gemara says to that, ha'amar kra, the pasuk says, itcha, you bring the animals with you into the teva, bedomin lach, they have to be similar to you. The assumption here is that Noach wasn't a treifa, and therefore domin lach, the animals have to be similar. They also should not be a treifa. So again, that's the source for treifa. But the Gemara asks, v'dilma Noach gufe treifa have it. Maybe Noach himself actually was a treifa. And the Gemara says to that, no, tamim ksiv bei. It says the word tamim by Noach. That implies that he's not a treifa. The Gemara says, v'dilma tamim b'drachav. Maybe he was tamim in his ways. It had to do with the way that he acted. The Gemara says, no, it already says that in the pasuk. Tzadik ksiv bei. It's written tzadik by him. So therefore, tamim must mean that he's not a treifa. But the Gemara says, v'dilma tamim b'drachav tzadik b'maisov. Maybe tamim is in his ways and tzadik is in his deeds. We'll see Rashi in a moment. But the Gemara says, Isal gadaydach, if it should enter your mind, Noach gufe treifa have, that Noach was a treifa. Mika amar leila Noach techevasach ayil shalemim lo ta'ayil. Would the pasuk have said, would it have stated to Noach, bring in animals like you that are a treifa, and don't bring animals that are not treifa? That would make no sense at all. And so therefore, clearly that is not the case. And the Gemara continues, but now that we're saying, we're learning from, you have to bring the animals with you, they should be like you, and that's the source. So l'chayos zera lamali. So what do we do with l'chayos zera? And the Gemara says, no, ma'u what might you have said, itcha, what does it mean when it says in the pasuk that you're going to bring the animals with you? Letzav sabi alma, maybe it's just to accompany you. Afilu zaken, afilu saris, even if it would be an animal that's old, even if it's an animal that's a saris, that's not able to procreate. Kamash malon. So again, the pasuk is teaching, no, it means to say itcha, it has to be like you, meaning to say, again, the purpose of this is that the animals should come into the teva in order to procreate. And Rashi explains, Hachi Garsinan, this is the proper text. Zecharim unekevos tumimim uvale mumin lafuke mechusar ever delo. Rashi prefers the text without the parentheses. The Gemara is simply saying, again, male, female, without a blemish, with a blemish. The only thing that's not allowed is mechusar ever, if it's missing a limb. Velo Garsinan tamus v'zachrus bebehemus. Rashi says, don't have the parentheses of tamus and zachrus bebehemus. To my irya kodem matan Torah, because what are we talking about before matan Torah? Tamus v'zachrus bebehemus, vein tamus v'zachrus ba'ofos. That's not only before Matan Torah. La'achar hakamas hamishkan nami isalaha. That's a halacha that applies even after the Mishkan was put up. There's a general halacha of tamus and zachrus by behema, and that halacha of tamus and zachrus does not apply by ofos. V'yodin further, midekamar avol mechusar aver lo. From the fact that the Gemara says that when it comes to mechusar aver, that's not allowed. Mechlal de balei mumin lo nifslu. That would imply that balei mumin are not disqualified lo bebehema v'lo ba'of, not by animals or by oaf. And again, that's not true. The general halacha is there's a halacha of balei mumin being excluded by behema that doesn't apply by ofos. Now, the way that we read the Gemara, we could read it with the parentheses. It could be what the Gemara meant to say was iskish behema la'of. In the pasuk that's by Noach, we compare behema to oaf, and therefore we're saying in that time, just like by oaf, the halacha is tamimenu v'alei mumin, so too that's the halacha by behema. Again, before the Mishkan, that might be the purpose of the parentheses, and then the Gemara goes on to say lafuke mechusar aver, that even before the Mishkan, mechusar aver was not allowed. Rashi continues, shenesar livnei Noach. How do we know mechusar aver is prohibited to bnei Noach lahakriv legavoa, to offer it legavoa? How do we know that bnei Noach are not allowed to offer an animal that's mechusar aver? And we learn that from the pasuk mikol hachai, which means shechayin rosha evarim, that the tips of the limbs are alive. V'lomali lazure alahu. Why warn about that? Ilav mishum hakarava. Rashi says the whole purpose must be because of bringing an offering. Again, the context of the pasuk is simply saying to bring these animals to the teva. But why be so specific about chayin rosha evarim? The reason is because there must be that some of these animals were being offered. Shehikrev mehen b'tseisum in teva, because Noach would offer from these animals when he left the teva. Milachayo zera nafka. Then the Gemara said that we learn out treifa from lachayo zera. The treifa ena yoledis, as we said in the Gemara. The treifa is ena yoledis; it doesn't give birth. And then the Gemara brought the pasuk of itach. It says in the pasuk itach, and that's bidom and lach. It's similar to you lamu'ute treifa. That excludes a treifa. The Gemara said tamim bidrachav. Tamim means bidrachav in his ways. What does that mean? Like onav v'savlan. That means like a person who is humble. It refers to midos. And then the Gemara said in terms of tzaddik, that could have maybe been b'maisav. It could have been in his deeds. And then the Gemara said ma'od tema itach. What might you have said that itach lav lemedrish b'dom lach? Maybe it's not to make a drasha that the animal should be similar to you. Ela shodia she'eno osel lechvodo lios lo letzavsa. Maybe the animals are just there as accompanying him. Kamash malon. So that's what the pasuk is. L'chayo zera is teaching. Lav letzavsa boiluhu, that the animals are not just for company. Umehashta al karchach itach yiseruhu, and then itach becomes an extra word. Lemedrish bei b'dom lach. Again, in order to make this drasha, they have to be similar to you. And the Gemara continues at the two dots, Tahorin avalot tameyin, and the Shinui Nuschos puts in the words Amar Mar over here. Amar Mar, the master said, we said previously, again, before there was a Mishkan, so the kinds of animals that could be offered had to be Tahorin, they had to be pure, avalot tameyin, and not impure, and again, that's learned out from Noach. And the Gemara asks, Umi have it tameyin or Tahorin by Ishaita, but was there such a thing as Tahorin and tameyin at that time? Rashi explains, Mi have hare lo nitna Torah, the Torah was not given. So what does it mean that there were tameyin, Tahorin? How is that possible? And the Gemara continues and answers, Amar Rav Shmuel bar Nachmani, Amar Rav Yonasan. Rav Shmuel bar Nachmani says that Rav Yonasan says, Me osan shelo nevda bohen avera. The meaning of tamein over here, tahorin and tamein, is animals where there was no avera that was done with those animals. The Gemara continues and asks, Mina have a yodi, but how did they know? Meaning, how did Noach know whether an avera was done with that animal or not? And the Gemara says, Kid Rav Chisda, it's like Rav Chisda said, the Amar Rav Chisda, because Rav Chisda said, Ha'aviron lifnei hateva, he passed them before the teva. Kol sha'ateva kol tasan biyadu ashu tahor. If the teva accepted the animal, so then it was known that it was tahor. Ein hateva kol tasan biyadu ashein tamein. And if the teva did not accept them, then it was known that they were tamei. And the Gemara continues. Rabbi Avo Amar Rabbi Avo says Amar Kratz, because the pasuk says v'haboim zochru nekeva. What does it mean? Haboim zochru nekeva. Haboim me'elei. And they came on their own, and that's how it was known. And the Gemara continues, Amar Mar, the master said, again we said above, V'hakol karvu olos, all were brought as olos, and the Gemara at this point understands that it means all animals that were brought as karbanos before the Mishkan, they were all brought as karbanola. And the Gemara says, olos in shlamim lo, they're brought as olos and not shlamim. V'aksib, but isn't it written in the pasuk, V'yizbechu zevachim shlamim la'Hashem parim, and that's talking before the Mishkan, and so therefore again, you have shlamim mentioned in this pasuk. And the Gemara continues and says, Ella rather, Ema hakol karvu olos ushlamim. Everything was offered, both olos and shlamim. V'atanya, but didn't we learn in a braysa avol shlamim lo, that shlamim were not brought ki im olos olos, only olos, olos in shlamim lo. That sounds like only olos were brought in and not shlamim. And the Gemara says, Kiman damar lo kirvu shlamim b'nei Noach. That's according to the one who says that the b'nei Noach, they didn't bring shlamim. The Itmar, it was stated the following machlokas amoraim, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina, Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina, Chad amar kirvu shlamim b'nei Noach. One says that the b'nei Noach brought shlamim, the Chad amar lo kirvu, and one says that they did not bring shlamim. And the Gemara continues, my time in the Mandamar Kirvu Shlamim B'nei Noach. What's the reason of the one who says that they did bring Shlamim? T'chsiv, as it's written, V'hevel Hevi Gamhu Mi B'choro Sono Mechalveyen. It says the word Mechalveyen. And so, Ezo Dover Shechelbo Karv L'Gavim Mizbeach. What kind of carbon do you bring just the chelev on the Mizbeach? You only burn the sacrificial portions. Vein Kulo Karv L'Gavim Mizbeach. You don't burn the entire thing on the Mizbeach. Havi Omer Shlamim. That would refer to a Shlamim. And so this pasuk indicates that Hevel brought a carbon Shlamim, that B'nai Noach do bring Shlamim. And the Gemara continues, my time at the Mandamar Lo Kirvu. What's the reason of the one who says that they didn't bring Shlamim? T'chsiv, as it's written in the pasuk in Shir Hashirim, Urit Safon Uvoi Seimon. It says, awaken north and come south. And we interpret that pasuk to mean Tisnayer Umo Shemaaseh B'Tzafon, the nation whose Maaseho, whose proceedings are in the north, that nation should be removed. That's a reference to the nation that brings only carbon olos, which are slaughtered in the Safon. They're slaughtered in the north of the Azara. V'tavo Uma Shemaaseh B'Tzafon Uvedarm, and it should be replaced by a nation that their proceedings are both in the north and the south, meaning they don't only bring karbonos which are slaughtered in the north. That's a reference to Klal Yisrael. And the Gemara continues, Umar Nami Haksivu Mechel Behen. Now, the other master also, what does he do with Umechel Behen? Again, by Hevel, it sounds like Hevi Gamhumi Bechoro Sono Umechel Behen. It sounds like something where the chelev is burned on the Mizbeach. Doesn't that indicate a Shlamim? And the Gemara says, no, Misham Nehen Didhu. That just means from the choicest of the animals. And the Gemara says, Umar Nami, in the other opinion also, Haksiv Urit Safon. What about the pasuk of Urit Safon? Again, we interpreted that to mean that they only bring carbon olos, the Bnei Noach only bring olos. And the Gemara says, Ahu B'Kibbutz Golius U'Dichsiv. The context of that pasuk is actually Kibbutz Golius. It's the ingathering of the exiles. And the Gemara continues and asks, V'aksib, but isn't it written in the pasuk, Vayomer Moshe gam atot titein biyodenu zvachim v'olos v'yasinu la'Hashem Elokeinu. Moshe says you're going to give us a zvachim and olos, and therefore if olos refers to carbon olos, zvachim presumably refers to shlamim. Again, that's before Matan Torah. And the Gemara answers, zvachim la'achila. Here the word zvachim, it just means la'achila, animals for eating. V'olos la'hakrav, and olos are for offering, and so therefore it's not a reference to carbon shlamim. And the Gemara continues, V'aksib, but isn't it written, Vayikach Yisro chosin Moshe Ola Uzvachim? It says Ola Uzvachim over there, and that also presumably is before Matan Torah. And the Gemara answers, Hahula Achar Matan Torah Hu Dechsiv. That pasuk is actually written after Matan Torah, so that's not a question. That's why they were shlamim. The Gemara says Hanich Lamandamar Yisro Achar Matan Torah Haya. That's good according to the one who says Yisro was after Matan Torah. Ela Lamandamar Yisro Kodem Matan Torah Haya. But according to the one who says Yisro was before Matan Torah, Ma'ikol Amemra. What are we going to say? Again, there's a reference to shlamim over here before Matan Torah. The Itmar, was, as it was stated, the following machlokas amoraim b'nei Rabbi Chia Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. There's a machlokas between the sons of Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. Chad Amar Yisro kodem Matan Torah Haya. One says Yisro was before Matan Torah. V'chad Amar Yisro achar Matan Torah Haya. And one says that Yisro was after Matan Torah. And the Gemara answers, Lamanda Amar Yisro kodem Matan Torah Haya. According to the one who says Yisro was before Matan Torah, Kasavar, he holds Shlamim hikrivu b'nei Noach. He will hold that b'nei Noach did in fact bring Shlamim. That's how he'll explain this pasuk. And Rashi explains, Haboin Meilein, the animals that came to the Teva, they came on their own. V'chalosin Shabo la Teva Meilein Bo, all of those animals that came to the Teva, they came on their own. Uvahen Hikir Osam, in that way Noach was able to recognize them. Shabo Shiva Shiva, if they came 7 at a time, Yoda Shein Tahorin, then he knew they were pure. V'Shabo Shnayim Shnayim Shein Tamein, if they came 2 at a time, then he knew they were Tameh. The pasuk said, Vayizbechu Zevachim Shlamim v'Sinai Kodem HaKamas HaMishkan Hava. That was at Sinai before the Mishkan was put up. V'Yata Amr, and you said Da'ad Shalohukam HaMishkan, that before the Mishkan was put up, Lo Kervu Shlamim Klal, Shlamim were not brought at all. La Kol Bein Li Yisrael Bein Livnei Noach Karvu Olos. What it means to say is as follows: whether we're talking about Klal Yisrael or Bnei Noach, they bring Olos. Aval Shlamim Lo Kervu Livnei Noach, but Shlamim were not brought by Bnei Noach. Umishas Matan Torah Shenivchru Yisrael, and from the time of Matan Torah when Klal Yisrael was chosen, so Kervu Lahem Shlamim, then Shlamim could be brought for them. Tisnar, and again it said Tisnar, means Lashon Vayinar Hashem Es Mitzrayim, like Hashem, he shook Mitzrayim. It's referring to the removal of that nation. Shema'aseh B'tzafon, the nation whose proceedings are in the north. Hainu Ola, that's a reference to Karban Ola. Shetu'unat Tzafon, that requires north. And Rashi continues, the pasuk in Shir Hashirim said, V'atavu el Melech HaMashiach, and come to the Melech HaMashiach, Uma, Shema'aseh Tzafon Vidarim, a nation where its proceedings are in the north and the south. The Hainu Yisrael, that's Klal Yisrael. Shemakriv and Olos Ushlamim, because they can bring both Olos and Shlamim. Misham Neon did too, and then we can interpret that pasuk. It really means Misham Neon, means Min Hashmein and Shebehen, the choicest animals. Umiu Olos have, according to this interpretation, it would just be Olos. That's the pasuk by Hevel. And Rashi continues, the other pasuk in Shir Hashirim, B'Kibbutz Golius, might be talking about Kibbutz Golius, the ingathering of the exiles. V'Hachi Kamar, according to that, it would mean as follows: Uri Ruach Tzifonis Uvoi Ruach Deromis, from the north, from the south, you should all awaken and come. L'Kabetz Golius HaMefuzoros B'Chem, as the ingathering of the exiles which are all scattered. Zvachim V'Olos, the pasuk said Zvachim and Olos, and according to the first interpretation, Zvachim Hainu Shlamim. Zvachim refers to Shlamim. V'Kodem Matan Torah Kula B'nei Noach, and again, before Matan Torah, everyone's B'nei Noach. Sounds like B'nei Noach are bringing Shlamim. Umeshani, then the Gemara answers, Zvachim Einon Shlamim. The word Zvachim does not mean Shlamim over here. Ela Lashon Shchita Bi'alma V'Lachila. Rather, it's just a language of Shchita, it's just slaughtering, and it's talking about eating. And the Gemara continues, Ketanoi, this issue of whether Yisro was before or after Matan Torah is a machlokas Tanoim. The pasuk says, Vayishma Yisro Kohen Midyon. It says that Yisro heard, that's the beginning of Parshas Yisro. Mashmua Shama Uvav in Iskayer. What did he hear that caused him to convert? Rabbi Yoshua says, Milchemes Amalek Shama. He heard about Milchemes Amalek, Sharei Kasa Betzido, because that's written adjacent. It says in the pasuk nearby, Vayachalosh Yehoshua Es Amalek Vesamol Fichorev. It talks about Yehoshua weakening Amalek. And the Brisa continues, Rabbi Lazar Hamodoi Yomer, Rabbi Lazar Hamodoi says, Matan Torah, Shama Uvo, he heard Matan Torah. Shekashenitin Torah Yisrael, when the Torah was given to Klal Yisrael, Hayakolo, Holech, Misofa Olam Viatsofo, the sound went from one end of the world to the other, V'chol Malchei Ovdei Kochavim, Achazoson Ro'ada, Behecholei, and on all of the kings of the Ovdei Kochavim, of the idol worshippers, they were trembling in their palaces, V'amru Shira, and they said songs, Shenemar, as it says, Uvehecholo, Kulo Omer Kavod, and in his palace all say glory. That's a reference to all of the various kings that they sang songs of praise in their palace. And Niskabsu Kulam Eitzel Bilam Harasha, all of these kings gathered by Bilam Harasha. V'yamrulo, they said to him, Makola Hamon Asher Shamanu, what are these sounds that we're hearing? Shema Mabel Boliola, maybe there's a flood that's coming to the world. Hashem la Mabel Yoshev, as it says in the pasuk, Hashem la Mabel Yoshev. Amar Lemi said to them, Vayeshev Hashem Melech Liolam, and that pasuk means to say, Kvar Nishba HaKadosh Baruch Hu already took an oath, She'eno Mevi Mabel Liolam, that he's not going to bring a Mabel to the world. Amrulo, they said to him, Mabel Shal Mayim Eno Mevi, maybe he's not going to bring a Mabel of water. Aval Mabel Shal Eish Mevi, maybe he'll bring a Mabel of fire. Shenemar, as it says, Kibo Eish Hashem Nishpat, it uses the word Eish over there as judgment. Amar Leni said to them, Kvar Nishpa She'eno Mashchis Kol Basar, he already swore that he's not going to destroy all flesh. Umakola Hehomon Hazesh Shamanu, and what are these sounds that we've heard? Amar Lemi said to them, Chemda Tova Yeshlo, Beveis Genozav Shaisa Genuza Etzlo, he has something precious that's stored with him. Tuf Kuf Ayin Dalad Doros, for 974 generations. Kodem Shenivra Ha'olam, before the world was created. Uvikesh Litno Levanov, he wants to give that to his children. Shenemar, as it says, Hashem Oz Liamo Yitain, Hashem gives strength to his nation, and miyad, immediately paschu kulam, they all opened their mouths of Yomru, and they said, Hashem Yevorech Esamo Vashalom, Hashem blesses his nation with peace. And the Brisa continues, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Rabbi Eliezer says, Kriyas Yamsuf Shama Uvo, he heard about Kriyas Yamsuf. Shenemar, as it says in the Pasuk, Vahika Shmoa Kol Malchei Ho'amori, all the Malchei Ho'amori heard, we'll see the Pasuk in a moment. V'yaf Rochav Hazona Amr L'Shlucha Yehoshua, similarly Rochav Hazona, she said to the messengers of Yehoshua also, Kishamanu Es Asher Hovish Hashem Esme Yamsuf, we heard about the fact that Hashem dried up the waters of the Yamsuf. And the Gemara asks, Ma'ishna Hasam Diyamar V'lo Hayavam Od Ruach, what's the difference that over there, the language of the pasuk, again, we'll see the pasuk in a moment, it says, V'lo hayavam od ruach, that's by the pasuk of Vayika Shmoa Kol Malchei Ho'amori, U'ma'ishna hachad to kamar, but what's the difference over here where it says, this is by Rochav Hazona, it says, V'lo kama od ruach ba'ish, and taking a look at the full psukim, the pasuk says in Sefer Yoshua in Perek Hey, Vayika Shma Kol Malchei HaAmori Asher Be'ever HaYarden Yama V'Chol Malchei HaKnani Asher Al Hayom Eis Asher Hovesh Hashem Esmei HaYarden. It's talking about drying up the waters of the Yarden. Mipnei Bnei Yisrael out of Varnu or out of Avram Vayimas Levavam V'Lo Hayavam Od Ruach. Mipnei Bnei Yisrael, they had no more spirit in the face of Klal Yisrael. That's what it says in Yoshua Hey, and in Yehoshua Beis it says, this is by Rochav, it says Ki Shamanu Es Asher Hovesh Hashem Esmei Yamsuf Mipneichem. We heard about the drying of the waters of the Yamsuf from before you. B'tzeischem in Mitzrayim, when you went out of Mitzrayim, V'asher Asitzim L'shnei Malchei Amori Asher Be'ever HaYarden L'sichon U'liog Asher Hechramta Mosam, and what happened with Sichon and Og. And the pasuk there continues, V'nishma Vayimas Levavenu V'lo Kama Od Ruach Be'ish Mipneichem. There was no ruach in anyone from before you. Ki Hashem Elokeichem Hu Elokim B'Shamayim Imal V'Al Oretz Mitochas. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Kuf Tes Zayin Amud Beis.